Thank you for regathering. A couple of housekeeping notes. Be sure you get your continuing education evaluation forms in. If you need a copy, Sonia will be sure you get one. Okay. This is a chance for some feedback. We really don't have an evaluation form, but feel free to share thoughts with us. We do read these. One of you once said, if you read this, I'll buy you a cup of coffee, and I let him know I read it, and I still am waiting for my cup of coffee. But we do pay attention to what you write. So thank you for that. We come towards the end, and always appropriate to pause and say some thank yous. She just headed out, but Sonia did our registration, and very appreciative of her work. If you'll leave your name tags, we can reuse the material. So I'll give them to her or put them on the table as you go. I think your rooms, just leave your towels in the tub. You can leave your beds made, keys on the counter, and then when you're done, you can feel free to go. And then I just want to say a thank you to all the people who have been presenters. We've had a lot of folks who've stood in front of you, who've done a lot of preparation, and every one of them. I called my wife last night. I said, man, I'm not disappointed with anybody. Everybody who has presented has done an outstanding job. And I hope what you take home are some new thoughts, but the realization we're all different, so you have to learn from every person and make it your own. And we have just tried in these hours to give you some tools so that you can be more effective in the kingdom work you're called to do. So thank you for coming. It's been a rich time for me to be with you, and the subject matter a little different this year, but I've very much enjoyed the table talk, and thanks to the table leaders. You've done some extra work as well. So, and we said thank you to you while you're out of the room, so thanks for your work. Yeah, leave your keys in the room. That's easier. Well, let's talk one more time. I think it's Nietzsche's quote of a long obedience in the same direction. Eugene Peterson took it and wrote a book on the Psalms, which has been, for me, a extremely helpful book, but I can never get away from the title. We are called to perseverance. And someone, I think Jason last night, was talking about the common times. A lot of our life is just the routine and the common. We just have to stay steady at what we're doing. It's not all mountaintops. In fact, Jesus said to Peter, we got to get off the mountain because ministry happens in the valley. So we've come even to this time. It's a bit away time. It's a mountaintop time. You're renewed and invigorated, I hope, as you go home, but we go live in the common times, in the valleys of life and the realities of ministry. So in the midst of that, we need this long obedience in the same direction. We all have heroes. One of my life heroes is my father. My dad was lived in the Boise Valley, married my mom, and we're just going to settle down to raise a family. And he was stricken with arthritis so severe he could not walk. And some of you who know my dad would maybe not even know that story. They got a job at the Boise Statesman as the cleaning people because what they could do is take my brother in, put him to sleep, and my mom would do most of the work, and my dad would crawl around and try to empty garbage cans and just try to have an existence. When he would get home, he would literally lay on the floor much of the day. He was just terribly stricken, and he kept trying to find all these remedies, and a lady came and said, I went to Portland and I was healed. You got to go to Portland. And my dad went to Portland, and my granddad told me one time, I never expected to see your dad again. He was that bad. And God touched my dad's body. The lady who had sent him soon had her arthritis back and lived with the pain until she died. But my dad was healed so radically that they say that weather can affect arthritis. It didn't even bother him. God radically healed my father and called him to ministry. He was in his middle 30s when he got the call. The other day, we took the big Bible to Celebrating Generations and opened it, and in there I found my dad's graduation certificate from NNC. It was just a preaching certificate. I didn't know we had that, so that was a pretty cool find. Went on to pastor, and long obedience, same direction. I came to my first church in Sandpoint, and I wasn't making much, but I was making as much as my father was earning after 30 plus years of ministry. He came to the end and felt like it was time to retire, and they had a very small savings, and they chose to move to Cheney and buy a little mobile home, and we're going to live out their days there and be available to this district until they died. 30 days before that final Sunday of celebration at Spokane Crestline, my dad got a phone call from Wayne Hagemeyer, who was pastor then at Spokane Valley, and said, last night my board voted to let me buy my own home. The parsonage is empty. If you'll come be my calling pastor, you can live in that parsonage. It was the nicest house they ever lived in. And my dad was a calling pastor until the day he died very unexpectedly after a very simple surgery at Deaconess Hospital. And I just look back at this long, faithful journey. They came to the end and they weren't sure financially how they really would make it, but God's provision. And God cared for them. I never forget that. And I have other heroes of the journey who have just set the course, never big names, never big recognition, just faithful service. And some of my favorite people to hang out with are retired pastors who are still committed to the call and still faithful to the service of Jesus. And so I just thought it would be a good way for us to close today, to hear from a couple of our guys who've been on this journey for quite a while. Both of them have been in their current pastorates for a very long time, who I am watching them. I hope that neither one of them are close to a retirement kind of announcement, but I am interested in watching how they're living out the journey and staying faithful and true to the God who called them. And I just wanted us to hear from them today. After we hear from the two of them, when I give the mic away, I'm done. When we're done with it, when we hear from the two of them, then I want you to turn to your table, and I'd like you to pray for each other before you go home. We've on purpose put you at tables to help you get to know some people, and because you sat at these tables for 3 days, I think you probably have come to know one another a bit, but there's some pretty significant things. This guy right here has a grandson tomorrow who will have heart surgery. He needs to be prayed for. And I know there's some hurting, tough situations going on in some churches, and I just would encourage you to be honest at your table. Let the people there pray for you. We need the Spirit to keep going. So, let's stay obedient, and let's stay on this long, good journey. It has its hard times, but remember, there's always another day. And one of my great reminders to myself and to all is faith needs a memory. So if you're in a dark time right now, have a memory that in the past God has been faithful, and let the memory of where God has served you and helped you keep you steady where you are, because there will be a new day. So we look in the rearview mirror to know God's faithfulness, and we keep our eyes on the road knowing that He's called us, and because He's called us, we want to run with faithfulness to the end. So, Bob Loon and Don Moore, two guys very respected for the journey that they have been on, and I just believe that in these closing moments they're going to encourage our hearts to keep going, and then we're going to pray together, and when we're done praying, you're dismissed to go. And thank you again for your willingness to come be with us. I don't know who goes first. I'll just let you guys sit down like we've done before. I'll hand the mic and you decide.
I'd like somebody to read Acts 17:27. Someone have a Bible and can just do that real quick? Sonia, you have that? Okay.
And perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us.
Though he's not far from each one of us. So where's God right now? And I know, because of some of the conversations I've had in the last couple of days, that some of you are going through hard times. Most of us are either going through a hard time, went through a hard time, or going to go through a hard time next week. So, but I think that for somebody specifically, you need to hear today that God is not far from you. I want you to know God is not far from you.
When Randy asked me to do this, I had no idea what to say. But I began to randomly to get some thoughts. So I have them here, and we'll see if I can follow them. But I've been on a great journey for ministry for 42 years. 38 of that is as a senior pastor. And in order to, the reason why I'm here is I have to go back to the beginning. The beginning when God called me into the ministry. I had to come to a place where I knew it was God calling me, not my family, not the church, not my friends. It was God calling me. I remember the first seminar I went to was Discovering Your Gifts. I was told by the director that with my gifting, I should never go into pastorate. But I knew God had called me. But because of that, I tried to be somebody that I wasn't. And through the years, I have gradually become myself. And I may be still working on that. And I hope I can continue. But that's where it began. There seemed to be a thought in those early days of ministry that in your first church, you got your feet wet, and then you stair-stepped from a bigger, better church to a bigger, better church. And but as Peg and I entered the ministry, we both decided that we wanted to go and be the people God wanted us to be and be where He wants us to be. So we always made it a matter of prayer separately. It's interesting, God led us separately to each to release us, to guide us. And we came together unbeknown to each other. This is what God is saying to us. So we sought to follow God from the very beginning. The grass, especially when you're going through trouble, looks greener somewhere else. But we have come to realize that if we need greener grass, God is our strength, our shepherd. He'll provide the greener grass. Don't have to move on He'll give it to us where we are. He'll lead us. It's been interesting as I look back over my journey, and this is my journey. It's not yours. Yours will be totally different than mine. But hopefully some of these points will spur something, help you in some way. But it seemed like that every 3 to 5 years of my ministry, God would initiate in me the need for something different, the need for a change in me. Not in the people that I was ministering to, but in me. And sometimes that was an attitude, sometimes was doing things a little bit differently. It was a time where I could have chosen to move. But that wasn't what God was saying to me. He's saying to me, right where you are, you need to change. And a part of that every time, in each of those times that God spoke to me in specific ways, He led me to think about revival for myself. Again, not for the church, not for the people, but for me. I discovered that as God spoke to me, I had been in spiritual ruts that I needed to get out of. And why it has happened that many times, I don't know. It may be different for you, but it seems like every 3 to 5 years that happens to me. And I'm in the middle of one of those right now. And my initial thought, Randy, was, it's time to retire. But God said, no, it's not time to retire. And the people of the church have confirmed that in many different ways. But I've always felt that as you minister in a community that your church is bigger than the 4 walls of the Church of Nazarene. I have been a minister to 2,800 people for 25 years. I have more friends and more things happening in the community than to the 50 to 100 people I pastor in the Church of Nazarene. And that's happened through coaching, chaplaincy. It's happened through Kiwanis, Chamber of Commerce. It's happened in a lot of different ways. But I walk down the streets, 1.5 miles to church building, 1.5 miles back every day. I'm the guy that walks down the street. I talk to people all the time. Oh yeah, I saw you walking this morning. And most of them know that I'm praying when I'm walking. And so they know that when I pass their house, they'll never dart my church, but I'm praying for them. And when I pass the other churches, I am praying for them. That's the way God has led me to a community. So that when my stats are bad, they're bad. But it's bigger than stats. God has shown me that I've got to minister to those that are around me, whether they're neighbors or friends or business people or whatever. So ministry is, another thing I heard when I was growing up in ministry is that a pastor can never have a friend, a close friend. But ministry is loving and serving people. How can you do that and not be a friend? I mean, different levels of friendship, I realize. But I think we're called to be friends to the people around us and develop those relationships. It's so important for us. Loving and serving people have tremendous rewards, but at the same time, there are many heartaches and challenges with people. What I believe God has shown me is that I cannot change any of those people. I can't change anybody in my church, and I can't change anybody in the community. But I can, with God's help, change myself. So when issues arrive, and they do come, when the problems come, I'm always asking myself, what can I do differently? How can I respond in a Christ-like manner? How can I continue to love them in the midst of this problem? How can I keep from them being my enemy? How can you help me? How can I look at this situation differently? How can I better understand the person that I've got a disagreement with? What can I learn from them? What can I learn from this situation? Another thing I've learned is it takes time to change people and things in the church, but also in changing, I've come to realize that people are more important than the things. And it takes time for people to change, and I need to give them that chance to that time. And for instance, when I first went to Colfax, I looked in the sanctuary and saw some stained glass windows that were ugly. And from day one, I wanted those windows changed. But I quickly found out there were some people married to those windows. And even a year ago, to change those windows would have caused a lot of division. But in God's timing, today there are brand new windows. You saw them. They've opened up the sanctuary. Took 25 years. But everybody loves them. Everybody thinks it was the right choice. So it takes time, and you can't do that in 6 months or a year or 2 years. It takes a little time to do that. Ministry is choices. It is attitude. It is priorities. And what is ultimately important? I have learned there is, in fact, I don't know of one thing right now that's worth dying over. Not one thing. So I'm willing to take the time and willing to look at the situation and work with the people. A few years ago at Assembly, I said something like this, that I was looking over my ministry and realized I've got more years behind me than ahead of me. And I don't know what the future holds, but my commitment from that time on has been that I will finish well. I will not quit learning. I will not quit growing. I will not quit loving people. So that's been my goal, but I want to let you know on a little thing here that it's not as great. I've never had greater temptations. I've never had more difficult situations than I have since that day that I said, I want to finish well. but I want to end on this note. I've never enjoyed ministry I've never enjoyed ministry more in my life. These are the best days. God is faithful. You can depend on Him. He'll see you through. And if you need greener grass, He's the good shepherd. He'll lead you there. Thank you.
When I was in the seminary, I was sitting in a class taught by Dr. Paul Bassett, history class, and he took one of his rabbit trails one day, and he got into this rant. And he started ranting and raving about pastors who did that ladder climbing thing, you know. He says, I want some of you guys to get off that ladder. I want you to go out to the Northwest, maybe even the Northwest Territories, and I want you to become the village pastor, and I don't want to hear from you again until we get to heaven. Well, you can tell that had a great impact on me. Because I still remember him saying that. I heard the voice of God, and so I assumed that when I got out of seminary, I would go to one place and I would spend my entire life there. And I would be buried there. I'm going to be buried in Othello. Because that's where I am. And so I was grateful when I ended up in Othello. And of course, I was an associate pastor. I was actually working with Randy's dad. We were both associates at Spokane Valley. And so I got an invitation to go down to Othello and interview. And I'd been to Othello one time before. And so all the way down, Kathy and I said, well, we're not going to move to that dumpy little town, I'll guarantee you that. But because Pastor Hagemeyer was going to retire in a couple of years, we knew we needed to eventually resign our position there. And so all the way down, we're practicing for the interview, and we got there, we met with the church board in the living room of Liberty's house, and not your house, but another Liberty. And we fell instantaneously in love with the people. And all the way back home to Spokane that night, we said, well, they probably won't ever ask us to come, but if there's any church we'd ever want to be a part of, that's the church we want to be a part of. And a couple of weeks later, they voted and called us to come, and we've been there ever since. And both Kathy and I feel like we are just the absolute luckiest people on earth to live in Othello, to pastor that church, to be a part of that community. And so I can't claim any credit for staying a long time. I just feel lucky that I've got to stay a long time. And so I consider myself, you say these are the best days, Don. I agree with you. I absolutely love what I'm doing. When I talk with people in the community, I say, I'm the happiest guy in town because I get to do what I love to do all day long, every day of every week. And I'm just incredibly blessed. I remember something that the Alban Institute, I don't know if they still teach it, but they teach that about every 18 months you will have a crisis or conflict arise in any organization, about every 18 months. So as pastors, we go to a new church, there's a honeymoon period that lasts about 18 months. And then you have this conflict, and you go, well, I guess the honeymoon's over. And you resolve that, and you go on. 18 months later, another one comes, because it's just ordinary in organizations for every 18 months to something to come up. When the second one comes up, you go, well, I think it's time to move. We weathered the first storm. I don't want to go through another one. And so we tend to move sometime after the second conflict that arises, which then gives you a national average of pastors staying 3 years, 9 months. 2 conflict cycles. Okay? Well, Lyle Schaller says that you don't become the leader of an organization until your 7th year. Which means then the majority of pastors never become the leader of their organization. They might be the chaplain. They may have the title, but they're not the leader of the church typically until about the 7th year. So I remember the 7th year being in Othello, and I brought up some issue in the board meeting, and the guy on the board just went ballistic. I mean, he starts yelling at me and ranting and raving, and I'm just kind of stunned by his reaction, you know, and he goes on and on and on about what a stupid idea this was, and blah, blah, blah. And if it was anybody else but you, I wouldn't even listen to it. But he put his hands behind his head and leaned back in his chair, and he said, but I know you, and I'm ready to listen. And I knew that night in board meeting, I had become the leader of the church. And there was a shift from that point on. And I had a different role within the congregation. Hasn't always been easy in Othello. I may be the luckiest pastor alive, but it hasn't always been easy. I remember a couple of associates that I hired that became very controversial. One that became so controversial that I actually had to bring a high school counselor in to have a church meeting. And I sat in the chair, and I felt like I was all by myself, and everybody else was out here, and I had the most unkind words spoken to me in my entire life as a part of that conflict. Just had to absorb the anger, the hurt that people are feeling. Well, you know, about every 18 months you go through a little time. And if you know it's coming, it doesn't have to devastate you. You just know that stuff's going to happen. And so we had that huge meeting, and a great deal of anger and stuff was shared. And the most angry family left the church, but most of them have come back. And that's a good thing. When the person that was the angriest at me had her son get shot in Iraq, the first person she called was me. And I got to her house before her husband got to her house. And I ministered to her till her husband was able to leave work and get home and minister to them. That's another thing, I think, over the long haul, and I know Don's found it true, is that you just become a part of people's lives, and even if they're mad at you, you're still part of their life, and you learn to live together like brothers and sisters, and perhaps it's easier in small towns like where we live to become a part of the community, but I think becoming a part of community is one of the things that I've most enjoyed, and I suppose the last thing I'll say is I think you have to have a kingdom mindset that I mean, okay, I'll be honest. I want to have the biggest church in town. I do. I really do. I wasn't playing for second place yesterday in miniature golf, Jim. And I had a one-stroke lead on him going onto the 18th hole, and I could not put it in the hole. I want the biggest church in town. I really do. But if that's my focus, I will manipulate, and I will twist, and I will do something really fleshly. I always have to remember the bigger picture, the kingdom picture. And my church is a manifestation of an aspect of the kingdom, but it's not the kingdom. It's not the fullness of the kingdom. And I work for the king. And so I have to have the big picture. Oh, yeah, one last story. So about a year ago, well, a couple of years ago, we had a drummer in our church, lived in this flop house motel on the edge of town, and he started telling everybody about how the Nazarene Church helped people when they got into trouble. And so we've been helping with rent assistance and food and clothing and counseling and all kinds of stuff ever since. And last summer I got this nudge from the Lord that what I ought to do is give them a free meal every month. So I talked to my friend at the Chinese restaurant, and so he gives me a cut rate on the deal, and if I get an honorarium or something like that, then I go, oh, hot dog, we get to have a free meal this month, you know, and so I use that to buy the food, and we have this meal. And so this last Sunday afternoon, 4 o'clock, we had our monthly deal, because on Tuesday of the week, I got a $200 check from doing this funeral long time ago. And, you know, they hadn't given anything, and I don't expect anything, but it came. And, wow, good, we get to have a free meal. And so we did that on Sunday afternoon, and we had 42 people come, and there was this man, came by himself, sat down at a table. He was one of the first guys there. Hour and 15 minutes later, he's still there. I don't know him. I had not seen him before. I knew everybody else, but I hadn't seen him before. And as I was walking past doing something with somebody else, he says to me, man, why do you do this? I stopped and I said, well, because I really felt a nudge from God to do this, and I figured it was better to obey than to understand. And I walked off. Well, he looked at me like I'm really weird then, and so then later on I got a plate of food, and I came and I sat down beside him, and with tears in his eyes he asked me again, why do you do this? And I said, well, have you ever noticed how there are some places where you have to listen to a sermon before you get the food? I said, I find that really manipulative. That really bugs me. So I wanted to just give free food and not preach and not teach and not do Bible study and don't do anything. I just want to give free food. He said, I've never heard of anybody doing that. I said, well, that's just what I feel like I need to do. I ended up praying for the guy while somebody else was over here ministering to a woman who had buried her husband the day before. Lady from my church ministering to her. And then another couple comes over to me and says, so, do you have a church somewhere in town? We'd really like to come to church. No preaching, no teaching, no Bible study, no advertising. Don't even know what church is doing it. And the love of God flowed out, and we had these ministry opportunities. So, if I have to sum up, what I would say is, don't worry about it when stuff happens about every 18 months. Stay there at least 7 years, because in the 7th year you really become the leader, and then you can start having fun. And love your community and things like that. Did anybody have any questions for Don and I?